Obviously, most everybody from this area is familiar with E.K. Warren and his son Charles. They pretty much ran the town, so to speak, back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And I think our view of them is pretty Michiana focused or area focused. We think of, the prosperity that Featherbone brought and the employment and the population growth under E.K. Warren during E.K. Warren's time. But certainly the Warrens' reach went way beyond this area, particularly in the areas Texas, New Mexico, Colorado. Now, they got involved in that part of the world, as you'll hear, because of Charlie Warren's cowboy dreams, but they soon found themselves swept up in all kinds of historical events that are very intriguing. And I dare say no one knows more about this chapter of the Warrens' history than Dr. David Murrah, who is with us. He is our presenter tonight. He was the longtime director of the Southwest Collection at Texas Tach University, and he's written extensively about the Warrens' holdings, along with other ranching interests in the area. The Warrens' holdings, collectively known as the Mule Shoe Ranch, I think. And I think I first came across your work, David, a serialization in a local newspaper in Lubbock, maybe. Have I got that right?
I think that's right.
Yeah. In any case, I will turn it over to you, and I'll start the slideshow whenever you tell me to.
All right. Well, Nick, thanks very much. It's a privilege for me to get to do this, and brings back some wonderful memories. And I greet all of you from a very cold day in Texas. We live on the Texas coast, about 1,300 miles southwest of you, and where it typically this time of day is 70 degrees, but we're hovering at about 40. But thank goodness we missed the ice storm that all took place north of us. So I have to share a little personal note to start this off. My visit to Three Oaks was one of the most memorable and great experiences of my life. In 1971, I began working for the Southwest Collection at Texas Tach University in Lubbock while pursuing a PhD in history. And the Southwest Collection is a historical repository that collects and preserves records and papers of area businesses in the American Southwest, and it has become internationally known, especially as a research center for ranching. Well, I had just finished my master's thesis, and in my master's thesis, I'd written the story of a ranch in that area, and that ranch was known as the Lazy S. And that's not to be confused with another ranch I'll talk about in a few minutes, the Lazy S, and you can pick up on the innuendo of that brand name. I remember being invited to speak to a ladies group, probably it was in early 1973 in an adjoining town, and they asked me to come and talk about the Lazy S Ranch. Well, I did, and afterwards the lady said, "What do you know about the Mule Shoe Ranch?" Well, I had to admit I knew nothing. And I said, and by the way, on the slide that you see is the Laziest Ranch, which lies in the county south of where the Mule Shoe Ranch was, 160,000 acres or so, stretched across two counties. And I'll mention more about that at the end. Anyway, so back to the talk I was giving, and I said, "Well, I don't know anything about it." And she said, "Well, there's this guy in Muleshoe, the town of Muleshoe, named Jack Hicks. He used to work on the Muleshoe Ranch. You might want to go contact him and interview him." Well, fortunately, I followed up on her question, and I contacted Mr. Hicks, who I learned he was married to Maddie Hogan Hicks, who was the sister of one Ada Hogan Murrah, who thus made her the wife of one of my cousins who lived in Muleshoe. Okay, you follow all of that? If you do, you're better than I. Anyway, Mr. Hicks then told me about the ranch, and he mentioned that all of the ranch records were still up in Michigan at Three Oaks, and that the longtime ranch accountant, Mr. William Kramer, was still living. And as a result of that visit, I got in touch with Mr. Kramer and made arrangements to come up to Three Oaks. And what a great trip that was for me. In fact, as I look back, I think it was the first major trip that I made for the Southwest Collection. I got to fly in Chicago, first time I'd ever been there, and drove over to Three Oaks. And so it was there. I took this picture when I was there that day on November 16, 1973. You know, that's nearly 50 years ago. I interviewed Mr. Kramer as well as Ray Hoffman for nearly 3 hours. And we talked all about the history of the ranch, and then I made arrangements to ship the Warren records to Texas, which they so generously were offering to us. We also agreed and microfilmed those records for them, which was about 25 rolls or 25,000 pages. And I assume that film is at the Three Oaks Library or at your museum. Well, as a result of that, and going through those records and papers, I got so interested in the story of Charlie Warren, and I ended up writing 2 articles out of it. One on the Muleshoe Ranch and one on the Warren Holdings in Mexico. Well, I'm here to tell you that my work doesn't do justice to the topic. Because there is so much there, and I just barely scratched the surface. And I hope someday a graduate student will come along and pick up that study and write a full-length biography of Charlie Warren. Nick, you might back up to that picture. Yeah, that's me on the standing with Mr. Kramer on that day. We're going through some of those records. I've aged just a little in 50 years. And so anyway, so the following that I'm going to be alluding to is from 2 articles, and one is published in the West Texas Historical Association yearbook, and the other one is in a book entitled At Work on the Range, I think is the name of that. And the bibliography will be at the end of this if you want more information. I understand from Nick that there may be in the audience tonight one of Mr. Kramer's descendants, a granddaughter, I believe, and perhaps they're also descendants of E.K. Warren. And for that, I'm very grateful. I had absolutely a great visit up there. Well, that's the background on him. And I'll apologize if some of this is very novel. Many of you are well informed on the history of Featherbone Company, but I'm going to include this information for my friends, a couple of friends who joined tonight and are watching as well. Well, many factors have been responsible for attracting settlers and investors to the plains of Texas. Not the least of this was a love for the land and the opportunities that it offered. Many young men left their 40 acres and farms in the east to become cowboys, but very few brought with them the combined desire and education and money, as did one Charles K. Warren of Three Oaks, when he was drawn into an adventurous love affair with the plains of the Southwest. His sword, which converts women's corsets into Texas cattle, is quite unique. Now, and I think, Nick, we need to change the slide to, there we go. Charles was the eldest son of Michigan merchant and manufacturer Edward K. Warren. Charles, of course, being in that situation, could anticipate a promising future and a blossoming industry, the manufacture of an amazing substance called featherbone. Featherbone, as you well know, was invented in 1883 by E.K. Warren and was made from the quills of discarded turkey feathers. Glued and stitched together to serve as an effective substitute for whalebone, featherbone became the principal supportive substance in ladies' undergarments. And by 1890, the Warren Featherbone Company was producing thousands of fine corsets and other products, and the tiny village of Three Oaks, Michigan, had been transformed into a small manufacturing center. Well, E.K. Warren, the stern father and devout congregationalist that he was, sent young Charlie Warren to boarding school in Connecticut and at Mount Hermon, Massachusetts. And then in 1886, apparently to allow the mischievous son an opportunity to dispel much of his energy, he dispatched the boy west to Missouri to work on the farm of a family friend. And Charlie was only 16 when he got off the train at Kingsville, Missouri, which was located some 50 miles west of Sedalia. And here's a map of Missouri, the larger map at the top, and then the red outlines the area that I've enlarged, and Kingsville is somewhere about in the middle of it. Well, that's where Charlie began his romance with the plains. When I got to Sedalia, he wrote to his father, the country began to get level, and as far as I could see, south, grass and plain. Fine country, he called it. And he instructed his father to tell his friends that the West is the best place to live. Well, during his 8-month stay in Missouri, young Warren shared by letter his excitement about the new country with writing his father, including riding horseback over the open prairies, herding Texas longhorns, not going to church, and seeing, and I quote, hail as big as hen eggs. Honest, he said. And he occasionally noted the different mannerisms of the Missourians. He said, what we call afternoon at home, they call evening here, he reported. And of course, everything is, I reckon this and I reckon that, and so forth. Well, before the 3rd month had passed, he announced to his father, and I quote, what I have to do now is to herd cattle on horseback, and it is just what I like, and I'm going to be a cowboy one of these days. And he said, the prairie is so level as far as the eye can see and all dotted with cattle, and it looks nice. I like the prairie as it is the best place I have struck yet. And poetically, he concluded, and a cowboy I will be, and a better-hearted fellow you'll hardly ever see. Well, the realizations of his dream was delayed. He got homesick, went back home, and then went back to boarding school. But his brief visit to the western prairies, nevertheless, had left roots he could not sever. After 3 restless years in school, Charlie Warren found himself at odds with educational restrictions. I had been going in for a good time and did not pay enough attention to the rules, he confided to his father in May of 1889. But he said, I think it taught me a lesson at last. Furthermore, Charlie could no longer remain at home. He said, ever since I came home from the West, you said I did not behave, and so I have not been home since, except 3 weeks last summer, and I don't think I acted very bad. Well, after dropping out of school, Charlie worked a short time in New Hampshire hayfields and in a mercantile store in Niles, Michigan. That was a job that his father had arranged for him. I think his father was trying to teach him a lesson there. But in January of 1890, he became a traveling salesman for the Featherbone Company and appeared to be settling into a comfortable future with corsets. But his travels eventually carried him west, and this time to lure him once again. From Chanute, Kansas, he had wrote back to his dad. He said, this is fine country and a great place to farm and stock raise. Better come out and let's go to farming. Well, subsequently, he found that suitcase living was too confining and the open plains were too inviting. And so late that year, Warren turned in his samples and headed for Texas. In Dallas, he was hired to work for the Nave McCord Cattle Company's Square and Compass Ranch in Garza County, southeast of present-day Lubbock. Let's go to this slide. I want to talk about this slide just a second to acquaint you with the area that we're talking about.
Like a
As you can recognize by the shape, this is the western half of Texas, particularly the Texas Panhandle and South Plains. But I specifically want you to note the region that is almost circular to the left of the picture the Llano or State Plains, as it's identified. That is a region that's perfectly flat. It rises about 400 or 500 feet above the surrounding country, and it is about 300 miles wide and 300 miles deep. We've lost the map there. It's known historically as the Llano Estacado.
My apologies. Anytime anybody knocks on the door to get in, I lose control of the slideshow. So I'm letting in people. That's the reason why we keep going back and forth between the slides. And so my apologies. And please, everybody do mute your microphone unless you're the presenter so that we can hear him. Thank you.
Okay. If you can go back to that slide again. Anyway, that region, the Llano Estacado, that's a Spanish name that roughly translates into staked plains. There's a lot of controversy about actually what it means. The better term is the palisaded plains, because to the early Spanish explorers, as they approached it, they said that it looked like a palisade. But three major cities on that plain today. Amarillo is on the north side of it. Lubbock is about in the center, and Midland is on the south. And but at the time that Charlie Warren shows up down there, there were less than 300 or 400 people living in that vast in that vast region. So anyway, that's where he ends up. So now let's go to this slide. He comes down to Dallas. As you can see, I've got Dallas marked there, and then I've marked the railroad that goes from Dallas west to Colorado City. That's the Texas Pacific Railroad. It had just been completed in 1881, and more than likely he caught the train at Dallas, rode it out to the brand new town of Colorado City, and then took a road on up to the Square and Compass Ranch. Now let's go to the next slide and look at the Square and Compass Ranch itself. It is the blue area marked it's actually in the southwestern quadrant of Garza County, and spills over into Terry County on the left. It was started in 1882 by grocers in St. Joseph, Missouri, and called the Square and Compass Ranch. And we'll change to the next slide. You can see why it was called that. This is their brand on the left, a square and a compass, and very clearly mimics the Masonic brand. And apparently the owners were Masons. There was 150,000 acres in that ranch, and it stayed in business. Charlie hits it in 1890, 1891, and 10 years later, it is the Square and Compass Ranch is bought by John B. Slaughter, who was the brother of the fellow that I wrote my dissertation on, C.C. Slaughter, and the owner of the Lazy S Ranch I talked about earlier. And John B. is the one who came up with the Lazy S brand, I think kind of to make fun of his brother's Lazy S or Long S brand. So he just coined the one, the Lazy S. So that's the meaning of those. Well, Charlie lands there on that ranch in 1890. And he was quickly, as he arrives, he's still a young kid, and he was dressed in a suit, white shirt, derby hat, and patent leather shoes. And so the cowboys quickly gave him the nickname as the Colonel. Well, he soon assured his parents that he was in a good environment. January the 1st. This is 1891. So I've been here since January the 1st, and I've not had a chance to spend a cent. As I have told you, as before I wrote you, cards and whiskey are forbidden on the ranch. So as you can see, as long as a man stays away from town, he's far from any temptations. And then he adds, it is only 70 miles to town. That's how far away they were. That town was Colorado City. He said, I shall be careful in my habits and not go to town with the boys, so please don't worry. I have too much sense to go to the bad, and I shall not follow Uncle Albert for an example. I'm curious as to know who Uncle Albert is and what he did. But so Charlie writes that to assure his ardent religious parents. As you know, E.K. Warren was an ardent, strong Congregationalist and teetotaler. Well, Warren wrote letters to his father then, appealing for financial aid in proposed business ventures, not money to sustain him, but he wanted to go into business involving horses, cattle, or land. However, he often described some of his experiences in West Texas cattle industry with a dramatic flourish. And this is one of my favorite letters I've ever found. He said, Father, it is great cattle all night. We had 3,000 two-year-old steers and drove them to the bedding ground, watered them, and about sunset, they began to. It was dark and cloudy. I could hear the boys humming a song as they rode round and round the herd. Their large Mexican spurs jingled as they rode round and round. I fell asleep. About 11 p.m., it commenced to lightning and then to rain torrents, and the herd yelling, broke to the end, and the storm was nothing. Only the lightning flashed, only the bellow of frantic cattle and the roar of thunder could be heard, and so I rode as hard as I could go until toward morning, when the rain ceased and when it was light enough to see. I found that I had followed about 700 steers and was over 20 miles from camp. I them up and kept them grazing till about 4 yesterday evening, before the boys came to have the for supper. Now remember, get the sequence there. Took them 24 hours to drive back. And nonchalantly, he concludes that letter, such is the life of a cowboy on a rainy night, and yet there's something fascinating about it all. Well, he also wrote his dad, he said, talked about the code of the West. He said, 2 cattlemen rode onto a yearling yesterday south of here, 12 miles. Both claimed it. One said if he was not to have it, no man could, and shot the calf. Whereupon the other man pulled his 6-shooter and shot the first man 3 times and killed him. One of our boys was at the inquest. Verdict, self-defense. So, and that's sort of the way it was. Well, after only a few months on the South Plains, Charlie returned to Michigan, apparently planning to persuade his father to invest in Texas cattle. Well, instead, E.K. Warren induced his son to accept an officer to manage the family farm near Three Oaks, an operation that was soon expanded to include 2,000 acres. Young Warren also involved himself in the Featherbone Company, eventually becoming vice president under his father. For 10 years, Charlie devoted his full attention to the Warren, Michigan interests. But in 1903, he finally persuaded his father to go in partnership with him, and they purchased a ranch in West Texas, an enterprise that eventually expanded into a cattle empire. What prompted them to buy this ranch was the breakup of the XIT ranch. And I need to give you just a quick background on the XIT. You probably have heard of the XIT. It was the largest range comprised. It ran along the west side of the Texas Panhandle. The ranch was created in 1882 and a land swap by the state of Texas. Texas had no money in the 1880s, but had a lot of land. And so the legislature made a deal to swap 3 million acres of land in exchange for the building of a new state capitol. And they put that out, and the Chicago syndicate under John B. Farwell jumped on it, and they built the capitol, and then they took the land in payment. And then, of course, they had to do something with the land. At the time, the land was only worth $1 an acre, just about the price that they spent $3 million to build the capitol. So they had $3 million in land, so they couldn't get their money back, couldn't sell all that land. And the wise thing to do was wait until land values increased. And so that's what they did. Well, in order to utilize the land, they decided to ranch it then, make it a cattle ranch. And so they went to England and borrowed money against the land to fence and improve the ranch. And so they operated it then, starting in the mid 1880s, started buying cattle and put on that ranch. But it was quite an operation, more than 200 miles from the top fence down to the bottom fence, north side of the present town of Levelland, Texas. Well, by 1901, the XIT had decided to start breaking up. Land values had started going up, and there was a demand. And so the first thing they did was start selling off large blocks to other ranches. One large block along the Canadian River went to the Matador Land and Cattle Company, which was a Scottish-owned venture. I'm working on a project on the Matador right now. And then George W. Littlefield, who bought a big chunk of the ranch down at the south end, and the town of Littlefield surrounds that land to this day. And so then Warren and his father decided to buy some of that land, and they bought land from individuals who had already bought from the XIT. Well, the XIT began to break up in 1901 and gave him an opportunity to buy land. So from a Tennessee land speculator, he first bought 40,000 acre YL Ranch, which lay in northern Bailey County, about 60 miles northwest of Lubbock. And you can see from the map on the right there where that is. The purchase price was $100,000. In 1907, Warren then doubled his holdings by buying additional former XIT land from banker cattlemen W.D. and F.W. Johnson. Subsequent purchases and leases enlarged the ranch to 150,000 acres. And by that time, the ranch then was situated along Blackwater Draw, in taking up most of northern Bailey County and in portions of Palmer, Lamb, and Castro counties, lying between the present towns of Muleshoe, Farwell, and Olton. And let's see, the next slide might be a map of no, I guess not. Okay. I guess the previous map was the map I have. Well, let's talk about the brand just a minute. The origin of the name of the ranch, the Muleshoe name for the ranch, is somewhat complex and it's confusing, and particularly in ranch folklore. There's several versions of how this story came about. The most popular being was that Warren, while he was trying to decide on a name, found an old rusty muleshoe. Well, that's just not true. Typically, ranches take their name from the cattle that they put on the ranch. Warren, some of the early cattle that he bought bore the Muleshoe Ranch brand, and or bore a brand bearing the Muleshoe. For example, the Johnsons own a ranch. The family descendants to this day still own a ranch called the Muleshoe Ranch down in Borden County, down below Big Spring and in that area. So that's where the Muleshoe name came from, and it came with the cattle that Warren had bought from the Johnsons, as well as the land. The Muleshoe brand was first used by the Johnson brothers on their Borden County ranch, and after obtaining that land, Warren used the Muleshoe brand briefly. But in 1910, he acquired a ranch in Mexico, and that cattle bore the U-Bar brand, which subsequently Warren applied to. According to the ranch foreman, the U-Bar was designed by the ranch's previous owner, Lord Beresford of England, and it was meant to serve as a warning to thieves, meaning you are barred. But the resemblance of the Muleshoe and the U-Bar was close enough to perpetuate the Muleshoe name and subsequently to become the name of the town that built up nearby in the county seat of Bailey County, Muleshoe, Texas. But keep in mind, the ranch preceded the town. By 1909, Warren his father had almost $500,000 invested in Texas land and cattle. Well, we're going to change the scene here now. Once they did that in 1909, they began to expand their operation into Mexico, and they purchased a ranch, the Ojitos Ranch in northern Chihuahua. That the museum has supplied, the museum has. This is a picture of Charlie Warren on horseback. I was intended to depict Mexico rather than Texas because of the mountains. You don't find that high of mountains in the area of Texas where they were located. In fact, you won't find anything because the Muleshoe Ranch is right on the heart of the plains, though, the Llano Estacado that I mentioned. And while there are a few depressions there around some of the lakes, I think they don't rise as high as what is depicted in that. The Ojitos Ranch was in Mexico, 100,000 acres, and they got it for $175,000. It had elaborate hacienda headquarters, complete with its own church, its lake, and a community of buildings. Although Warrens hired a foreman for each of the Mexican ranches, they managed their operations from Three Oaks. Oh, and I've overlooked there was a second ranch, of the Palatado Ranch, that they had as well. So they had those two ranches, and then they had a third ranch in the Boot Hill of New Mexico, right on the border to allow them to get the cattle into Mexico, and it was the Alamo Ranch. Well, as in most of Mexico at that time, the state of Chihuahua was on the eve of the Mexican Revolution, and it already by that time had become a haven for, Chihuahua was a haven for large mission. And had 10,000 American Warren acres. Okay, can you hear me? Nick? Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Nick? Hello?
I can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Nick is not hearing me for some reason. Can you see me? Okay.
I can hear you. You were
Okay.
on for a little while. My problem is I'm running a slideshow, so I can't get back on and turn my mic on so easily. So I'll go back to the slideshow, and I think we can all hear you pretty well now.
Okay. Let me. All right. Do you remember where I was?
Well,
Oh,
all right.
I
We're talking about the beginnings of the revolution, the war
Yeah.
in Mexico. So I think if you go back to that, then we'll all have sort of caught up, I think.
And I don't know why I'm showing you whether you're seeing bananas on my bar rather than me. That doesn't
Yeah.
make much sense.
We'll look at the slideshow in a minute, so
Okay.
it won't make as much difference.
Well, I had just talked about the ranches that he had in Chihuahua, and I was talking about the other American-owned ranches there. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I think
Yeah.
you're about to launch into the Mexican Revolution and kind of the impact.
Okay.
Right? Mhm.
All right. The placid and prosperous ranching economy of northern Mexico was shattered with the outbreak of the Mexican Revolution in 1910, just at the same time as the Warrens are getting involved there. As the revolution splintered among self-styled generals, the ranchers soon found that their herds were decimated from confiscation by both federal and rebel troops. Cattle theft and scattered fighting quickly affected the Warren operation. In 1911, its 15 American ranches resigned, leaving only 2 Americans as cowhands. And for the duration of the revolution, the ranches were maintained by Mexican employees. And then revolutionary bands began to frequent his ranch. Charlie Warren gave thought to selling out. I'm going to be worried with a lease that is expiring in 30 days. He wrote this in 1912. He said, I'd rather pull down my money and take my cattle out at the expiration. Next slide. So this is the area where Charlie was warring. Now here we are at Madero. Well, although military activities in Chihuahua increased sharply, Warren tried to placate every faction. During the Battle of the Ciudad Juarez in May of 1911, he personally paid revolutionary leader Francisco Madero $2,000 to allow him to move a herd of cattle out of Mexico. Now, Madero was supposedly a good guy, but Warren understood that transaction to be a loan which would be repaid by the Mexican government. But he could not recover the money. Warren claimed that Madero simply pocketed his funds. Well, as conditions worsened and perhaps recognizing that his option to sell his interest would mean loss of $275,000 in investment, Warren appealed to the United States government for aid. However, the State Department exhibited little sympathy toward American property holders in Mexico. Its official policy, as proclaimed by President William Howard Taft on March 14, 1912, was for Americans to stay out of Mexican affairs. Ambassador Henry Lane Wilson in Mexico City did demand that the Madero government bring about stability in order for American property to be protected. Warren was determined that his operation would survive the revolution. Then he wanted to explain. And so with only informant
All right, David, we're having trouble hearing you again. I'm not sure what can be done about that, but I'm not getting but every 5th word or something like that.
Okay, let me try changing. I'm gonna kill this.
Yeah, you can take off the picture. That's fine, and maybe that'll help the audio.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's much better.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
I
Yeah.
can't hear anybody there though. Oh my goodness. Let me see. I've almost got to go back to this to hear.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you. We've been able to
Okay.
hear you all along.
Okay. All right. Well, let's try. Just let me know if we have a problem. Let's see if I can get back. Okay. Anyway, so he was determined to survive. In September 1912, the Ojitos Ranch was looted of supplies and its mules were taken. And then in January 1913, the ranch lost 300 head of cattle to an unnamed revolutionary, and then was forced to pay $7,500. You know, that's like 60,000 today to a local guerrilla leader, Jose Yunus Salazar, so that the ranch could brand its calves. Well, in September, the ranch paid to another local leader, Maximiliano Castillo, $2.50 a head so that it export its cattle across the border. Because of constant pressure of undisciplined forces, ranch supplies were carefully rationed. He said, "We've been buying just what we expect to use during the month and sending it to the people at Ojitos," reported the superintendent McDowell. He said, "We don't care to keep much on hand on account of the rebels may come along and take it." You know, this sort of has a familiar ring. You think the cartel in Mexico today is something new. It's not. This kind of stuff has been going on down there for years. Well, in late 1913, both Maximiliano Castillo and then one Pancho Villa began a systematic destruction of the Terrazas cattle empire, which is adjacent to the Warren ranches. For nearly 2 years, raided the Terrazas areas and drove the out of Mexico. Their village Warren ranches were not spared.
Okay, David, your audio is getting funky again. I'm sorry, but
I just don't know.
okay, now you're all right.
Okay, well, I'm gonna hold my phone. I don't know.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, well, I'll try this. All right. And Warren's ranches weren't spared during that pillaging. In November 1913, Villa's band crossed the Ojitos, destroyed the headquarters, and stole 4,000 cows and calves. As a result, calf production, which had averaged nearly 4,000 head annually prior to the revolution, dropped to 2,000 in 1914 and 1,100 in 1915. This made Warren finally ordered the abandonment of the Ojitos in 1915. His cattle were moved to the Palatauda, which lay closer to the American border. Well, events in Mexico City as well as Mexico helped to bring some massacre of several American engineers in January 1916, followed by Villa's March raid on Columbus, New Mexico, prompted American military intervention. And that sent John J. Pershing and sent 6,000 troops into Mexico, and they used the Warren Alamo Waco Ranch as a staging area, and they rode on into Mexico in March. Pershing's first overnight encampment was at Warren's abandoned Ojitos Ranch. With American troops in the area, Warren then used the protection of the American president to withdraw temporarily the remainder of his Mexican cattle. Then in early 1917, as Mexico was preparing a new constitution, and with the revolution seemingly settled, Warren then restocked his Mexican ranches. Well, although he was able to resume his Mexican operation, Warren was forced to continue to pacify discontented elements in Chihuahua. From 1915 to 1920, his foreman, a black foreman named Bunk Spencer, was captured 6 times and twice held for ransom, notes of $5,000 each. And sad to say, Spencer ultimately was killed by bandits in 1921. And then in 1920, 2 of Warren's men were killed by a government force, provoking Warren's manager to inquire rhetorically of Warren, "Can you see the slightest difference between the new government and the rest of the real thieves that have been allowed to roam the Mexican ranges?" Well, Warren did survive the revolution because he carefully paid every tax levied, whether it was by government or insurgent forces, and because he consistently utilized Mexican natives as cowboys. Furthermore, the cost for labor and taxes were less in Mexico than on his American ranches. For example, in 1915, the cost to produce an animal on the Mule Shoe Ranch back in Texas was $9.08, whereas in Mexico it was only $5.46. But yet he could get the same price at the market for the 2 cattle. So he could double his money on the Mexican cattle. By 1924, Warren had restocked his Mexican pastures to pre-revolutionary levels. But an outbreak of hoof and mouth disease in later years, especially in 1947, forced the United States to embargo shipments of Mexican cattle. As a result, the Warren family that still owned the ranch decided to abandon the Chihuahua operation. It sold its Ojitos Ranch in late 1947 to the mayor of the city of Juarez for only 50 cents an acre, less than 1/3 of the original purchase price. The sale then ended 38 years of Warren's involvement in Mexico, but in spite of the outright confiscations of one of the ranches and depressed cattle sales on another, Warren operation probably fared better than did any other American ranch in Mexico. Well, meanwhile, back in Texas, Warren's investment prospered, especially after the Santa Fe Railroad built its Clovis cutoff. And I refer to this map as you see here. You see Lubbock and you see the Mule Shoe Ranch. And in 1912, that line was extended. This line actually extended up from Houston and was called the Clovis cutoff. It did with a mine Santa Fe, Mexico. And what it did was create a transcontinental route from Houston to the west. And it's still a main shipping line to this very day, and it split the Warren holdings, and of course greatly increased land value. When the railroad came through, well then Warren decided to start colonizing the ranch, so he began selling off the tillable land to settlers, and thus Bailey County joined in the population boom. Let me see, the next slide I wanted to comment on, this is a classic picture, and this is one that I found in the collection, and it's been used many times. It was taken on the Mule Shoe Ranch to depict the end of the cattle business. You see the cow trail running diagonally across the picture, and then the farmer is plowing a furrow across it to kill the cattle trail, so to speak. That picture was taken to illustrate this point, that the country was rapidly converting from ranching to farming, and that picture was taken on the Mule Shoe Ranch. I know it's part of a mural in the Texas State Museum in Austin, the Bob Bullitt Museum, to this day. Classic photo, and one I'm very proud of to help to get into circulation. Well, it was as a result of the colonization, it was in 1924 the Warren operation reached maturity. The death of E.K. Warren in 1919 had divided ownership of the ranching operation among several heirs, causing the family to incorporate its holdings as E.K. Warren and son. Charles served as president and majority stockholder, including the Michigan farmlands. The company owned or controlled over 500,000 acres and 25,000 head of cattle on 3 ranches. Well, in 1932, after several years of ill health, Charles Warren died at the age of 61. Yet he had lived to see the fulfillment of his boyhood dream. 48 years before his death, he had written in a reference to Texas. He said, "I want to go where I can do the best and save up the most." Well, after arriving in Texas in 1891, he vowed, he said, "This country is new and I want to make my money in it." And that he did in spite of his inexperience, drought, and revolution. For 22 years after Charles Warren's death, his ranches were maintained and expanded by other stockholders, primarily under the direction of his brother-in-law, George Lackey, who had been associated with the venture almost from the outset. Charles's son, E. Cabe, then became president of the company in 1940. In 1944 and 45, the family acquired 2 additional ranches in New Mexico and Colorado. Well, in 1954, the older members of the family no longer retained controlling interest in the company, and so the remaining ranches then were sold off, and the Warren ranching empire existed no more. And that brings me to the end. I want to just comment on a couple of slides. Let's go back to that slide just a second. This is a map, one of my maps showing the Llano Estacado with cities and roads on it, and you can see it's basically bordered by Interstate 40 on the north, along the north side of it, and on the south by Interstate 20. And those 2 routes also were originally railroad routes. The Texas Pacific Railroad is the one on the south, and Rock Island was the one on the north. And then since then, an interstate has been built connecting Amarillo and Lubbock Interstate. I've forgotten the number of it. And there's about, I think, 500,000 people live in that area to this day. Maybe a few more. I've forgotten the statistics on that. But it's a rich ranching and farming country. My wife family still owns 2,500 acres immediately to the south of the Muleshoe Ranch, right on the Texas state line, southwest of Muleshoe, and we farm 800 acres there to this day of cotton and grain sorghum. So I stay in close contact with that country. And then, as I mentioned, I had family that settled on the old Muleshoe Ranch. My grandfather's twin brother lived there for many, many years as well. The next slide, if you have any interest at all in the history of this area, my last book is this book. It's the story of the Lazy S Ranch, the ranch to the south that I've mentioned from the outset. And it's called The Rise and Fall of the Lazy S Ranch. It came out last year. And then here on the next slide is a bibliography of the essays that I've read from today. Rancher's Response to Revolution. That is in John Wonder's book, Working the Range, Essays on the History of Western Land Development. And then 2 articles from Corset Case, Stays to Cattle. Well, it's 3 articles. The first one up there is in the West Texas Yearbook, Charles K. Warren and the Muleshoe Ranch. And then there's 2 shorter articles in a series called Caprock Chronicles, from Corset Stays to Cattle, the beginning of the Muleshoe Ranch, and so forth. Both of those I wrote, and they're based upon the 2 articles above it. That's my presentation. I apologize for the technical problems, but that seems to come with Zoom. I'll be glad to take any questions.
At the Baldwin Theater in downtown Royal Oak.
Are there any questions? I'm still sharing the screen, so I guess I'll stop that. And yeah, Gene, go ahead. All right, I'm going to unmute you or ask you to unmute yourself, I guess.
He didn't mention anything about Charles's family. Did he marry and have children, and where are they?
I don't know. I know he had children. I mentioned one of his sons, EK, but I don't know the circumstances of that. Nick probably does.
I can't, I believe he did have offspring, but I can't give you details on how many and where they are. There might be somebody else who could.
Yeah. Well, now Carol and I have been really privileged for the last 30 years to live in the home that Mr. E.K. Warren built for his son Paul as a wedding gift in 1904. And where is the brother Paul in all of this? Did he just go on to, what happened to him?
He went to Evanston.
Again,
That's another subject.
Yeah, I don't know that anybody but Charlie was affected by this cowboy fascination. I don't think either of the others. Obviously, Paul, what I know about him is he had an amazing watch collection that I believe at Michigan State. And then, of course, the other son, and these were half siblings. Charlie was the product of E.K. Warren's first marriage to Sarah Stevens. The other two were, I believe, okay, go ahead, Suzanne. Suzanne knows a lot about this. Yeah.
I just looked up on Find a Grave, and Charles's children were Pauline Warren Driver. That was his first wife's daughter, and he divorced her and then had 4 more children: Caroline Warren Wilson, Sarah Warren Hoffman, E.K. Warren, and Charles K. Warren.
Oh.
And Charles K., I remember my dad and he went to school together.
Oh.
So he was born about 1919, the youngest one.
Oh, nice.
I'm assuming Sarah Hoffman is married to then Ray Hoffman.
Yeah, that would be
talked to,
right.
David?
The questions point out the fact that there's a need for a full-length biography on Charles K. Warren.
You did speak briefly about Albert Warren, about how I hope not to be a disappointment like Albert, something like that. There was E.K. Warren who built up Featherbone. There was his brother Fred who invented the calculating engine and then died prematurely. And Albert went out west to California to look for gold, and I don't think he ever found much. But he really frustrated E.K. Warren because Albert was a jeweler by training, as was Fred, and he thought maybe Albert could help get the calculating engine working again, but Albert wanted nothing to do with it. He wanted to go out and pan for gold out in California. So that's the sense in which he was a disappointment.
That's interesting.
David, thanks for your presentation. Did E.K. Warren ever make it out west to see any of the ranches?
I don't know. There's one picture that Nick had that we talked about. We think he may have at least made it to the Muleshoe Ranch. There's a picture with cactus. I mean, conceivably it could be in Mexico as well. But the trip to Mexico was pretty arduous. Mr. Kramer went down there, went to Mexico. In fact, he told me a great story about riding the train and then going down. But I don't have any documentation that E.K. went, but there is a picture that implies that he was there.
Thank you.
Anybody else have a question?
I have some information that I could possibly share. There's a lady in Houston that I have.
Yeah, it is Julie.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
There's a lady in Houston by the name of Roxy Warren Cargill, and she is the granddaughter of Lydia Warren Chamberlain, and she's lived her entire life in Texas. She herself is in her late 80s, and she had been corresponding with our museum and is the one that sent the Jerusalem worship book, amongst other items. And I'm not quite sure where she is to play in the whole ancestry situation, but I know that she has resided in Texas, she has told me, her whole life, and she's in Houston.
I'm now unmuted.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. This is Roxanne Chamberlain Cargill, who is the great-granddaughter of E.K. Warren. And we heard yesterday that another great grandson of E.K. Warren, just passed away. His name is Robert Warren, and we are in contact with Bob's one son who will be visiting us in a week or so.
Hi, everybody. I can't hear anything. I think it's all going in your hearing aid.
Sorry.
But that's okay. I just wanted to say hello. We did come to Flag Day and we marched in the parade and we learned a whole lot of history. I've only been to Three Oaks that one time, and then once when I was about 4 years old. My grandmother, Lydia Warren Chamberlain, I remember, and I got to go to the big old house on the lake, Lakeside, Michigan. But I thoroughly enjoyed my visit also. And thank you very much for sending the letter, whoever sent it. And I guess that's about it. It was a lovely presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Gene?
Yes, we hosted a gathering of the Warren family when the Warren family were the Grand Marshals in the Flag Day Parade. Did you come to our house that night?
I did. It's good to see you. It was a lovely trip. Peter actually remembers even more about it than I did because he's very good at remembering all of these things. So he reminds me. But we had a wonderful time and we marched in the parade and we came to your house. And thank you very much. This was very interesting.
Yeah, well, one of the things that really impacted me was that this family, this very distinguished family, so many of the people didn't know one another at all. I mean,
no, we scattered.
Yeah.
It was, in fact, I knew about it because I went to the 100-year celebration with all those people of the Warren Featherbone Company because I read about it in the Wall Street Journal. It was on the front page. And so I met all these people when probably 35 or 40 years ago. I knew very little. My father, William Benton Chamberlain, was EK's grandson, right? Yes. But he left and I didn't know too much about any of this. So I was quite fascinated.
Nice to reconnect with you.
Well, I loved it very much. I don't even remember when that big celebration was. Probably, 15 years ago?
Yeah.
So, but we're still alive and kicking, and thank you very much for today.
And we are too. Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Good to hear.
Thank you. Well,
somebody in this bunch I met on an airplane, and that's how
Well, that was Donna Mitchell, and she referred you to me. I'm Julie. We had those conversations. You sent the book to my house and different.
Yeah, the E.K. Warren.
Yes.
What was it called? It was when he chartered the boat with all the Sunday school
It was
teachers.
the Jerusalem worship book, and then there was another book. Yes.
Yeah, and I had found that, and I thought nobody cares about this except somebody someday might. So
we have it in our museum, and it's very precious to us. So it's
maybe I will get back there sometime. And thank you very much, Julie. I do remember talking to you now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
And in addition, we do have some photographs of E.K. Warren, one with his sons and his son-in-law, which was Roxanne's grandfather.
Yeah, all of that.
That was Frederick Chamberlain, who was the superintendent of the plant, I believe, wasn't he? The Featherbone factory?
Frederick was the granddaddy. I don't know what the heck he was.
And
I don't. But he was married to Lydia Warren Chamberlain. Is that right? Yeah. Frederick?
The home in Lakeside is called Longacre. Yeah, and it's
right.
Still standing.
Okay. So you all know much more about all of this than I do, but thank you for keeping it alive.
Well, thank you. And thank you, David.
Place to stay if they want to come back.
Thank you, David Murrah, so much for your.
If you ever come back to Three Oaks, you're welcome to stay with us.
Thank you so much. Loved it.
David?
Excuse
David,
me.
My grandfather was William Kramer. And so you talked with him when you were there. And we have so many keepsakes. We have there was the picture, and I gave a burned piece of wood with the U-Bar ranch. We have the branding iron. We have a couple pictures of the actual Cowboys branding. And then we have a lot of small memorabilia, and we have some from Pancho Villa. So it's like my mom loved history, and she helped put together something at the Congregational Church about the trip to the Middle East. And they had plates and bowls and very special articles that are still, as last I knew, still at the church.
Right. I think it was the
I believe, I believe at some time during that visit to the Holy Land, they were in contact with some Samaritans.
Yes.
And I believe that there are some Samaritan artifacts, I believe it in Lansing, Michigan, or somewhere there.
Right, right.
I did that interview that I did. I don't know, Nick, whether y'all have a copy of that interview or not. It's at Texas Tech, and the lady who's the granddaughter, you could get a copy because you're a relative of it. You'd have to request that of them, but if you're interested, I can put you in touch with them if Nick doesn't have a copy of it. Anyway, it's about 3 hours.
You gave a copy on tapes to my grandfather. My grandfather gave them to my mother, and she had them put on CDs. And then she had the daughter of John and Marlene Kramer, who was a court stenographer. She listened to the tapes and transcribed it. So I was thinking, Jean and Carol, when you bought Hoffman's piano from my mom,
oh yeah,
we gave you a copy of it. We gave you a copy of the CDs.
Margaret, this is Judy. We do have those copies that you gave us. I think we have the cassette tapes and the CDs. And we have the piece of wood with the mule shoe brand on it too. So thank you very much for donating those artifacts to the museum.
We have more, we just haven't gone through them yet, but it's listening to the stories that David and my grandfather and Ray Hoffman talked about Pancho Villa and how he would chase them and he would, kidnap the foremans and things. It's like, it's special.
Yeah, they really are. So anybody that would like to borrow those CDs from the museum, you're more than welcome to contact. And we have a little bit of paperwork, but you're more than welcome to borrow and listen to that interview with Mr. Kramer.
So Margaret, what is your relationship with Ray Hoffman? Was your grandfather?
My grandfather was William H. Kramer. He worked for it. So he made all the trips out west.
Okay.
And accumulated a lot of things. And then as the...
So are you related to John Kramer then?
No, it's spelled the same. His grandparents and my grandparents were very good friends, but no relation.
Oh, okay.
There's another interesting fact that may interest you, and that is that when we were at the Three Oaks, we went to the Warren Dunes and the Warren Woods on basically on the shores of Lake Michigan. And these two properties were loaned on a 99-year lease to the state of Michigan.
Right.
And Gus Whalen, who is Roxanne's cousin and also a great-grandson of E.K. Warren, he passed away about 3 years ago.
I didn't know that.
He was the one who initiated the deal with the state of Michigan, because they said that somebody called Paul Whalen should have filed reports with the state of Michigan every year and didn't. And because of that, the deed is invalid, and they threatened to take over the properties. And thanks to Gus and to Bob Warren, the gentleman who passed away recently, they were able to convince the state to let the Nature Conservancy take over these two properties,
Oh,
so
really?
that they would not be used for commercial development.
Oh, great. Oh, great. That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah, I don't know. Gus Whalen's widow, Roxanne, was in touch with her today, and I don't know if she has any documentation of that. But when Bill Warren, who's E.K. Warren's great-great-grandson, when he visits with us, I'll see if he has any of his father's documentation, because those are the two people that were involved in all the negotiations.
That's great.
Thanks for listening.
One other thing that I just thought was interesting is that there was property that was sold, but the Warren family retained the mineral rights, and each Warren family got it. Well, they gave my grandfather some, and so he split it among his children. And so when my mother passed away, I have part of the Warren mineral rights.
Oh,
Not quite sure where it's at. I think it's in Texas, but it's interesting.
It's very interesting.
Yeah, the mineral rights were sold off or leased to oil companies, and the small cement building next to the statue of E.K. Warren, Three Oaks, was in fact the Warren Oil and Gas Company, where the royalty checks would come in, be accounted for, and then distributed to family members, I believe.
Was the Bob who passed away recently, was he from Maryland?
He worked for many years in Michigan, in Milwaukee, and then retired and became a sailor and lived on the Piankatank River off the Chesapeake Bay. And about 5 or 6 years ago, when they found it difficult living there, moved back to Milwaukee, and that's where he passed away.
Okay.
And his youngest son still lives there, so that's why they were there. And unfortunately, Bob's wife has Alzheimer's, but is still living.
Well, as I recall, when they had visited here, Bob was very interested in Three Oaks and the museum and participating, in the heritage.
Yes. Yeah.
Yes, and helped us secure Heritage Hall as well. The other building that we own, which is the second oldest township hall in Michigan. He helped us secure that building.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Great.
That's wonderful. Yes, that's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Very interesting discussion.
Well, we have a lot of Warren tentacles are represented. Great.
Right. That's
but
great.
I do want to, we've taken a lot of David Murrah's time, and thank you so much, David. I appreciate it. I'm sorry for all the curveballs that Zoom throws at us all, but I think you overcame them admirably. I do want to make a note that in a month, we'll have another program, First Thursday program, about the history of dryers, which this year will 110 years since Ed Dreyer bought the market. And so Carolyn Dreyer and Gary Lang, who both know way more about dryers than anybody else, are going to be with us. And I've been scanning Ed Dryer's archives, about 175 images so far and counting. So there's some really wonderful old photos that have not been seen widely. So that'll be on March 2nd at 7 o'clock. I also want to just note that Kevin Harrington, the professional photographer in Three Oaks, has also recently given the museum a huge number of old negatives that he rescued from the library when they were deteriorating back in, I think, the 80s or something like that. So
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Unless there are further questions for David or further comments, I think I'll let you go about your evening then.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.